Welcome to C# for Total Noobs on Developer Ramp-Up. In this lesson we'll build upon what we have done so far and we'll do some exercises. You heard right, we won't learn any new concepts in this lesson, instead we will focus to do some exercises with conditional statements. The important thing is with these exercises is that you pause this video and that you will write the code by yourself. And if you have some time afterwards, it's important to look for more exercises just to get accustomed with writing code and writing conditional statements. So let's get started by opening our My First App project that we have used to work on so far. And it should open in a few seconds. The status of the current project should be exactly the same that we left off during the last lesson. So we would have to make some cleanup to this solution or to this project file to get started. So what we won't need in this case is basically we don't need anything here except for this last console read line that we might have here. So we simply delete everything and we can get started. To get started, let's look first at the first exercise that we want to do here. So that's the first requirement. Write a C# program to check whether a given number is even or odd. So what this means is that we would have to write a C# program, a console application, in which we make the user give a number, so we need an user input, and then we would calculate if this number is even or odd, and of course we would display this information to the console so that the user can see it. Let's now get to Visual Studio and see how we can implement this. This exercise contains, I would say, of two different parts. The first part is the so-called setting up part, where we have to write to the console an information for the user about what we expect from him or her, so that we expect a number. And then of course we would have to take the user's input and then do the exercise itself, so our basic algorithm that would calculate and inform us if the given number is odd or not. So let's start by setting up. Let's first write console.writeLine, and here we would write an information for the user to know exactly what the user needs to do. Please enter a number. We'll tell you if it's odd or even. Okay, and then the next step we would expect the user to write the number. In that case, what we need to do is we need a variable. And since we want to say if a number is odd or even, this means that we need a variable of type integer, let's call it x, and we need to parse here the input from the console, so the number that the user types in. In this case we have seen previously that we can use int parse, and here in this parse we should use then this console.readLine. Okay, please know that it's important the capitalization of all the words that you write here, like readline. It's with capital R and capital L and so on. Good. Now we should be able to get the input from the user. However, before we go any further, I just want to show you another method in which we can convert a string which comes from the console to a number. And this would be, for instance, we could use convert to int32. And in parentheses here we would also specify console readLine, because we want to read what the user provides us from the console. Okay, so now we get a number. What this does is exactly the same thing that we did earlier with int parse. So it's two different ways to achieve exactly the same result. It's important to know that in most of the situations there are several ways in which you could accomplish a certain task. And of course, when we talk about more complicated programs, we could think about which of the options would have the highest performance and so on. But for now, it's good for us to get accustomed with the idea that to accomplish a certain task there might be one or more ways to do it. We'll keep on using this convert to int32 right now. Good. Now we have also the integer. So we have informed the user, please enter a number. The user enters a number, we get that number, and then we have to display this message. And this is where our, let's say, real part comes in. Because now we need to evaluate the number that the user typed in to see if it's odd or even, and then display a certain information based on the result. Let's do the following. We need for this, of course, an if statement because we have to evaluate a certain condition. And here let's also add the code block in curly braces that we will where we will write our code a little bit later. Let's now think about the condition that we have to fulfill here. So we need to decide if a certain number is odd or even. And here there is a very easy way in which we could do that using a certain operator that we have talked about when we talked about operators. And that is the remainder operator or modulo operator. How this is supposed to work? Well, it's fairly easy. We need to evaluate if x, then we have to use this remainder operator, which is this this percent sign, and we have to divide by 2. But what is important for us is that this remainder or this remainder should be 0. What does this mean? This means that if the remainder is 0, then of course our number is even. And in that case we can console.writeLine, and let's also use string interpolation because we don't know exactly the number that the user will specify. So we'll use $ here, and in curly braces we put x is even. So that's right. In this case, if we evaluate this statement, so is this number even? So if we divide x by 2, will the remainder be 0? This means that it is even. And the other only scenario that is possible in this case is that the remainder is not equal to 0. So this means that in this case we can just use an else code block, and in this else code block we could simply say that the number is odd. So console writeLine, and here we'll use once again string interpolation, and we'll in curly braces x is odd. So that's mostly it. Let's run this program and see exactly what happens. So first of all, after a few seconds, I will be displayed this information. Please enter a number. We'll tell you if it's odd or even. Let's add number 4 and press enter. So what happens is that 4 is even, which is correct. Let's now close this program and run it again. If we run it again right now, let's give as number 5. And this time the number is odd, which is correct. So this means that our exercise, or we have created a program that complies with the requirements that we have received. As a final step, let's use the debugger and breakpoints to see exactly what happens. So we will run once again this application. Of course, we still have to provide a number. Let's provide an uneven number. And we enter this if statement right now. So we evaluate this condition. So x remainder or modulo 2, we see that the result is 1 because we don't get the actual result of the division but the remainder. So the remainder is 1. And this means if we hover our mouse over this equality operator, we see that this statement is false. So of course when we then go further and execute the program, it will simply jump over this code block, this if code block, and of course it will enter in the else code block where we will write that the number is even. And once again, if we choose to stop this program and run it once again by providing an even number, we would see that theoretically the code block in this if statement is executed. So let's do that. We see that in this case the condition is evaluated to true because 4 divided by 2 has a remainder of 0. So in this case we simply write to the console that x is even, and if we go further then the else is kept. We don't need the else anymore because this condition was met. So we go to console readline, which will simply keep our console open until we hit enter or until we close it. So that's it for the first exercise. It was a fairly simple one, but the important thing here is to know how you can check if a number is odd or even. And believe me, this is the type of operation that you would very often use in your programs, and should you go to interviews for a software development job, this is really something that the interviewers probably will always check with you for a role as a junior software developer. This remainder or modulo operator is really important. So let's go to the second exercise and see exactly what is expected from us. Here it is. Write a C# program to find the largest of 3 numbers. This is a little bit more complicated than we have done so far, and we will see also why. But let's understand first exactly what this requirement is. So what we would need is, of course, to write an information to the user that he needs to provide us 3 numbers. The user will provide 3 numbers and we will have to get the values for those numbers and assign them to a variable. And then we would simply have to compare the numbers and display an information to the user and let him know which number is the largest of those 3. It's fairly easy, so let's see how we can implement it. So we are back in Visual Studio. Here we don't need, because this is from the previous exercise, let's delete this. And we will keep the first console write line, and we have to think here a little bit how we will organize our information that we want to display to the user. Let's here on the first console write line, let's say you will be asked to provide 3 numbers. Okay. Then we can add another console write line. And here we can already start to get the values. So what we would do here is, please enter, let's use this first number. Now, of course, we need to assign this to an integer. Let's define or declare this integer x, and this should equal to int parse, and in this int parse we would have console.readline. This is good to go. So of course we have to add the parentheses here at readline because it's a method. And now we have the first number. Then of course we can console writeline. Here we would ask the user, please enter the second number, and here also let's use the please enter the first number. Okay, then of course the next step would be to read the value from the console and assign it to another integer. So we need a new variable of type integer. Let's call it y equals, then let's use the other one, convert to int 32, and here in parentheses let's provide console.readline. And we have right now the second number. Of course we would have then to write console writeline. We need also a third number, so please enter the third number. And last but not least, we need a new variable of type integer. Let's call it k equals, let's use int parse once again to see that we can really use both of the methods to convert a string to an integer. And here we need console readline. And with this, the setting up part is ready in my opinion. We have all the information that we need. We have displayed to the user the information that we want to get from him or her, so we are good to go. Now as a next step, we would have to write our algorithm. And as said, this is a little bit trickier, or it can be made a little bit trickier. And we will look into this because it is an important concept behind it. So let's start with an if statement. It's clear that we need an if statement because based on these if conditions, we can define which number is the largest from the three numbers provided. So we have if, let's also add the code block here. And let's start with the first number. The first number is x. So let's evaluate the condition if x is greater than y. Let's compare the first number to the second. Now the question is what happens here? And the cool thing is that we can already use another if statement in an if statement. So we would have nested conditional statements. The advantage here is that we would have to write less code, because in this case we can already do the following. We can have another if statement, and in this statement we compare if x is greater than k. And in this case it's clear that we can write to the console that x, so the first number, is the largest from them. And we can do this already once again with string interpolation, which is not here but here, and the largest number is, and in this case we have x. That's okay. Now we have evaluated, so if the first number is greater than the second number, so we already know that if we are here, x is greater, so the first number. Here, if the first number is bigger than the third number, then it is clear that the first number is the bigger of them, so the largest. The other thing is that the else here, we could use an else, because if we know that x is less than or smaller than k, then k is the largest number, because we already have ruled out in this if statement the y number. So we already know here the y is for sure not the largest number. So in this case we could also use an else here, and in this code block we could simply do console writeLine, and here we can provide the following information, also with string interpolation. The largest number is, and we can use here k. Good. So right now we already performed a certain evaluation of the numbers. Now here we can go back to the parent if statement, and if x is greater than y, then we did another if statement. Then we can, however, add another condition evaluation. So we would use else if and condition and code block. Let's think about what other condition can we evaluate here. So we have evaluated the first number if it is greater or larger than the second number. And of course now we can simply evaluate if the second number, so y, is greater than the third number. And in this case we already know that the second number should be the largest, because in the first if statement we have ruled out, so if the execution have passed this if statement and has reached the else if, then this means that x has been ruled out, so x is surely not the largest number. In this case we should simply console.writeLine, and we can inform the user that the second number, so y, is the largest. Let's use string interpolation as usual. Of course, not in the quotation marks, but outside of the quotation mark. And the largest number is, in this case, it would be y. And if we are here, so if our evaluation has reached this else if, it means that we have ruled out x. So x is surely not the biggest number. So if this else if is also not true, that what this simply means is that the third number is the largest of them all. So we could add another else code block, and here we can use console.writeLine. Okay, here we should inform the user that the third number is the largest. The largest number is, and let's put here once again k. And right now this program should work because we have evaluated all possible relations between these three different numbers. Let's now run the program and make some different use cases for it. Let's, for instance, in a first run, provide the first number 10, the second number 9, the third number 8, and the largest number is 10. In the second run, let's make the second number to be the largest. Let's have the first number 7, the second number 10, and the third number 9. And here the largest number is 10, which is once again correct. And in the next try, let's make the third number to be the greatest. And here let's put 7, here 8, and here 10. And in that case, the largest number is 10. And I would also like to run the program with exactly the same numbers that we provided earlier, once again also with a breakpoint to see exactly how all the evaluations go. Let's then debug the program and provide numbers. So the first number that we provided was 7, then the second was 8, and the third number was 10. And now we hit the breakpoint, so we can go back to Visual Studio. And we evaluate. The first evaluation is x greater. Let's make this a little bit smaller so that we can see more in the screen. X greater than y, it's false because x is 7, y is 8. So if we execute this, we see that nothing in this code block is executed at all. So we go to this else if, where we evaluate y against k, so the second number against the third number. So the second number, y was 8 and the third number was 10. So of course also this evaluation is false. If we execute it, it will simply jump over it and it will not execute this code block. So finally it arrives to this else and it would write that the third number is the largest. And that's basically it, console write line, and we will display everything to the console right now. The largest number is 10. So this is the second program or the second exercise that we did when we had to compare three numbers and to find out which of those numbers is the largest of them. I have to say that there is also another option to do this with a lot of less code, but using another type of operators, and since this is a more complicated topic, we won't cover it in this lesson. For now it is important that you get accustomed with these conditional statements. It was important for me to show you that we can have nested conditional statements. So inside an if statement like this one, we have another if statement. This is also possible, and in fact you will see this a lot of times when you will develop your software. And I wanted to use also the else if and the else, and to make all these comparisons to write, let's say, as few code as possible. And I think we achieved this. Now we can go to the third exercise. So let's see exactly what is the requirement. In this case, we would have to write a C# program to read temperature in centigrade and display a suitable message according to the following classification. So if the temperature is below 0, then the message would be freezing weather. If the temperature is between 0 and 10 centigrade, then we should display very cold weather. If the temperature is between 10 and 20, we should display cold weather. If it's between 20 and 30, normal temperature. Then if it's between 30 and 40, we should say it is hot, and if it's over 40, then we should say it's very hot. So let's go back to Visual Studio and see how we can implement it. First, we'll have to do some cleanup here, because all these things are from the previous exercise and we really don't need them anymore. So let's delete everything. We'll just keep the first console write line. However, we'll rewrite it and we'll see, please enter your current temperature in centigrade. As a next step, we would expect the user to input something via the console. So we would need a variable of type integer x equals and int.parse, because we need to parse the value that the user provides. And here we should add the console read line, because we want to parse the value that our user inputs from the console. So the setting up part was fairly easy for this exercise. Everything is done because we have everything what we need. We inform the user about what exactly he or she needs to type in the console, and then we take the value that the user types and we assign it to our variable. So right now we have to design our very small algorithm to display the information that we need. And to make it a little bit easier, let's paste all the information that we need to display, and we can comment it out because this is not real code. It doesn't need to be executed at all. So just commenting it out is just for our reference, that we don't forget exactly what we need to display in certain circumstances. And of course, what we need to do here is we would need an if statement. And the first condition that we would evaluate, let's also add the curly braces. If x is smaller than 0. In this case, we have to console.writeLine, and what we need to write here is the first one, freezing weather. So let's do that. It's freezing weather. Okay. Until here everything is okay. Since we know exactly all the scenarios that we would have to cover, what we would need here is basically to use several other else if blocks. So we would add an else if. Here we would add our condition, but first let's also add the curly braces, and let's take here the second thing. So we would need to display a certain message with very cold weather if the temperature is between 0 and 10. So how we could express this in an else if statement is the following way. So else if x is greater than 0 and logical AND operator, we covered this during our operators lesson, x is smaller, let's make it also smaller and or equal to 10. In this case, what we want to display is cold weather. So console.writeLine, and here cold weather. That should be it for now. Let's make a brief test of this program so far. So let's run it, and when we will be asked to provide a value, let's first give -1. This would give us freezing weather. Let's also run it once again. Let's make it 0. And in that case, nothing has happened because we don't know exactly what to display. So let's make if x is smaller than or equal to 0. In that case, we want to display freezing weather. Let's run it again and use 0. In this case, we got freezing weather, so everything is okay right now. Let's also try to provide 10 as an input. So if we provide 10, it is cold weather, and run it once again. If we provide 5, it should be also cold weather. So why we did this is because right now we can evaluate if our thinking process is okay, and it seems that it should do the job. So what we would simply have to do here is add a bunch of another else if blocks. However, in order to make the code cleaner, there is another trick that I really wanted to show you. And it is the following. If in the code block corresponding to an if statement or else if statement or also else, we write only one single line of code, so only one single line. In that case, we can skip the code blocks, so we don't need to use this syntax where we would also need the curly braces. So this would translate to this, and here we can also eliminate the curly braces. Okay, let's also go on edit and advanced and format document. I want to rearrange everything according to the Visual Studio format, and we have it like this way. Now, as you can see, we don't have any red squiggly line, which means that we don't have any compiling errors. Once again, if in an if code block or else if code block or else code block, we have only one single line of code like this here, then it is not necessary to use the curly braces anymore. So we can simply go further and else if, then condition. The third condition would be the temperature would be between 10 and 20. So let's make in this case if x is greater than 10 and x is less than or equal, so less than or equal to 20. In this case, what we want to display is that cold weather. So it's 2 times cold weather. Then this is not okay. So this should be very cold weather. We missed this when we ran it the first time. So let's do it. And here the next else if, we can simply write cold weather. So console.writeLine, and here in this console we will display only cold weather. So that's it. Let's go then for the next one. The next one is if the temperature is between 20 and 30, and that would display, it should display normal temperature. So else if, let's do it once again. We have here x should be greater than 20 and x should be less than or equal to 30, and in that case we have to console writeLine and here cold or no, normal temperature. Okay, then the next one is if the temperature is between 30 and 40. So else if x is greater than 30 and x is less than or equal to 40, and here we have to display it's hot. Let's display hot weather, so console.writeLine and hot weather. That's it. And the final condition is if this temperature is above 40. Let's remove this equal because we already included it here, and here else if we need here another condition, and here we could simply say if x is greater than 40, then we have to console writeLine, and here it's very hot weather, and we're done. So if we would have used code blocks for each of these statements, then our code would have expanded over several other lines, but in this way we managed to keep it as short as possible. So let's now also remove those comments because we don't need them anymore. Let's clean here up also some space, and let's run the program. Let's try to run it several times and give different values. So the first one would be -1, freezing weather, it's correct. Now let's give one between 0 and 10. Let's give 5. It's very cold weather. Then let's give another temperature that is between 10 and 20. And this should be 15, for instance. It's cold weather. That should make it. Should be according to the requirements. Then let's give here 25. It should be normal temperature, which is also okay. Then we should give one that is between 30 and 40, and we can use 35 for it. It's hot weather. And if it's over 40, let's try to use here something like that's very rare, 50, and it's a very hot weather. So that's basically it. These were the requirements, and we have written a program that satisfies the requirements that we have gotten. So right now a user can simply input the current temperature, and we will inform the user if or how the weather feels like. If it's freezing cold, it's very cold, cold, normal, hot, or very hot. So that's basically it for today. In this lesson we covered some exercises. In the description for this video you will find the requirements for all of these 3 exercises. So you can also exercise by yourself. But as I said at the beginning of this video, it's really very important for you to take a few more time and to think of other such exercises that you could easily resolve with conditional statements, because it is really important for you to get accustomed with writing code and especially with writing conditional statements. In the next lesson we will go further and we will look at loops. Loops are really a fundamental part of C# programming and of programming in general, I would say. And there are several types of loops that we will look at. There is also some theory that we have to discuss, but of course we will then also look into some practice. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you back in the next lesson.